The webinar is live.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ann Cotton, Director of Schaefer Center for Public Policy at the University of Baltimore. It's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to this candidate forum for the Democratic candidates for the Office of Maryland Attorney General. The forum sponsors are the League of Women Voters of Maryland, the Schaefer Center for Public Policy at the University of Baltimore, Maryland Nonprofits, Maryland Reporter, Maryland Matters, and Maryland Latinos Unidos. A little bit about our sponsoring organization. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League's mission is to empower voters and protect democracy. The Schaefer Center for Public Policy at the University of Baltimore's College of Public Affairs is a nonpartisan applied research and public service organization that leverages the expertise of the university community and its work to inform decision makers through applied research, develop public servants through its training programs, promote public discourse through policy analysis and conferences, and grow future leaders through its Maryland Public Service Academy. Maryland Nonprofits is a statewide association of more than 1,400 nonprofit organizations and institutions with members in every county. Its mission is to strengthen organizations and networks for greater quality of life and equity. Maryland Nonprofits is also home to the Standards of Excellence Institute. This year, Maryland Nonprofits is celebrating its 30th anniversary. Maryland Reporter is the original nonprofit news website covering state government and politics in Maryland. Founded in 2009 as a 501c3 tax-exempt organization, Maryland Reporter does original coverage, produces a daily news roundup of coverage of government and politics from news sites and bloggers from across the state. Foundations helped start Maryland Reporter and is supported by private donations, foundations, and sponsors. Maryland Matters is a nonprofit news website focusing on state government and politics. Launched in 2017 as a blog, Maryland Matters began publishing a daily news report in 2018. It has more reporters covering the State House than the Baltimore Sun and Washington Post combined. Maryland Matters is funded by reader donations and foundation grants. And finally, Maryland Latinos Unidos, MLU, is a statewide network that collaborates and builds collective power for the benefit of Maryland's Latino and immigrant communities. MLU members are organizations, businesses, and individuals who support Latino and immigrant communities across Maryland. MLU addresses the challenges faced by emerging communities, provides technical assistance for community-serving organizations, builds links to all levels of government, and advances the knowledge of about Latino communities through research and outreach. Tonight's forum is being recorded and will be available on the University of Baltimore's YouTube channel and the websites of the host organizations. In addition to tonight's events, we're also hosting a forum for the Democratic candidates for comptroller on Tuesday, May 31st at 7 p.m. The link is posted in the chat. We will not be hosting a forum for the Republican candidates for comptroller, as there is only one candidate for that race, and the League of Women Voters rules prohibit hosting single candidate events. The sponsors tonight encourage you to be informed about the candidates and the issues. You can do this through the League of Women Voters vote411.org site and their voter guide, which will be available on June 4th, and Maryland Matters voter guide, which is available on their website. Links to both websites are posted in the chat. We also encourage you to vote. The deadline to register is June 28th. Early voting runs from July 7th until 14th, and the primary election is July 19th. The deadline to request a mail-in ballot is July 12th, and ballots must be postmarked or placed in a designated ballot box by 8 p.m. on July 19th. Now on to the reason why you're here tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening, Len Lazaruk, founding editor and publisher of Maryland Reporter. Len?
Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Tonight, we have the two Democratic candidates for Maryland Attorney General, Congressman Anthony Brown and Judge Katie Curran O'Malley. The current Attorney General, Brian Frosch, is not seeking re-election. We will let them describe their legal experience in their opening statements. Here are the rules for this forum. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Then I will ask a series of questions from a list prepared by the forum committee. The candidates will have 2 minutes to respond to the questions. If a candidate has a rebuttal, they will have 30 seconds to follow up. Which candidate will go first was determined by a random drawing, and that went to Congressman Brown. We will alternate candidates responding to questions unless a question is directed to a specific candidate, which is not our plan at this point. At the end of the forum, around 8:50, if we start on time, and I think we are, each candidate will have 3 minutes for a closing statement. Nancy Soren of the League of Women Voters is our timekeeper. The time allotted for each portion of the program will appear on the screen and count down as time elapses. The screen will turn yellow when 15 seconds remain. It will turn red and the word stop will appear when the time is up. Candidates may finish their thought, but they must stop speaking at some point. So thank you, folks. We're going to start with the 2-minute statement from Congressman Brown, and then we'll hear from Judge O'Malley.
Well, first of all, thanks, Len. I want to thank our sponsors for hosting this evening's event, giving voters an opportunity to hear from the candidates directly. As Len mentioned, I'm Anthony Brown, and I'm running to be your next Attorney General. I've been an attorney for nearly 3 decades, putting my education, training, experience, and passion in service to my clients, state court, federal court, class actions, complex litigation, big tobacco litigation, and later in my career in service to the public. Experiences ranging from a second lieutenant in the United States Army to 16 years in Annapolis as a member of the House of Delegates, and then you're a lieutenant governor, and most recently completing 6 years in the United States Congress. And through all of that experience, what is clear to me is that Marylanders deserve, they are demanding, they're yearning for an attorney general who will be a champion for change and build on the progress laid out by Brian Frosch. Maryland's a great state. We've made a lot of progress over the years, but too many barriers exist for too many Marylanders. And many of those barriers are based on structural racism. We see it in education and the environment, in housing and healthcare. We see it in the workplace, policing, and the criminal justice system. I'm running for Attorney General to eliminate those barriers, to make government work again, and to fight for the changes that will protect every person and empower every community. The Attorney General is the chief legal officer of the state. And yes, the Attorney General represents the state, but more importantly, the Attorney General works for the people. So I'll investigate problems, I'll advocate for legislative change, and I'll set enforcement priorities that are consistent with the people. And I hope this evening we'll have an opportunity to discuss a wide range of priorities for the Attorney General and for me.
Wow, that was terrific. On time. Judge O'Malley.
Thanks, Len. And I want to thank everyone, the sponsors for organizing this, my alma mater, University of Baltimore School of Law. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with everyone here tonight and learn more about issues that are important to Marylanders. I've been going all around the state, and what I've learned from my 30 years of working in courtrooms is that Marylanders really want an Attorney General that has courtroom experience, that's tried hundreds and hundreds of cases in front of judges and jurors, and has also presided over thousands of cases. You know, when I started working as a prosecutor, as a young lawyer, I realized that there were plenty of people in our system that didn't have a voice, whether it was child abuse victims, victims of domestic violence, people with drug addiction issues. I worked in those arenas, working with people to solve their problems as a prosecutor. And before I left the Baltimore County State's Attorney's Office, I was chief of the white collar crime unit. And what I found particularly disturbing there was that so many of the victims of fraud were elders, were our senior citizens. So for the past 20 years as a district court judge, I've been working in the busiest courthouse in our state, in Baltimore City. Although I've sat in other courthouses around the state, I primarily sat in Baltimore City, where again, I presided over thousands of cases dealing with issues of mental health issues, veterans treatment court, drug addiction issues. And that's important because your next Attorney General will be leading 400 plus lawyers that go to court every day in the areas of consumer protection, public safety, criminal justice reform, as well as protecting our precious environment. And right now, when women's rights are under attack because of the looming overturn of Roe v. Wade, we need to elect more women that are qualified for offices all across our state and our country. So I'm thanking you for the opportunity to talk about these important issues tonight, especially in light of the tragedy yesterday in Texas, on what we need to do to have an Attorney General that uses the laws to protect our citizens here when it comes to gun violence. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight, and I look forward to a great evening.
Thank you, Judge. And actually, since we're alternating, we're going to start the questions with this, a very broad question that many people may not know what the Attorney General does. Could you explain the key functions of the Attorney General's office as you see them?
Sure. The Attorney General's function as the lead law enforcement officer for the state is to protect Marylanders in civil suits. It's to proceed against bad actors when it comes to criminal actions, as well as antitrust suits, as well as large class actions involving the tobacco litigation that was litigated years ago, where we're still getting restitution, and the opioid class action suit that Attorney General Frosch entered into. So it's a complex office, and the Attorney General needs to be someone who knows how, she knows how to attract the best and brightest lawyers that will be going into courtrooms around our state to defend our rights when it comes to public safety. Right now, the Attorney General's office has the Organized Crime Division, which is a very active division going after organized criminal activity, gang activity in the jails, all across the state. And it's been very effective working with our federal partners in the U.S. Strike Force, as well as our local and state prosecutors, working with them to curb violence, as we've seen it's on the rise in horrific ways and dehumanizing communities. So it's really important that an Attorney General has that experience and has been in those courtrooms doing that type of work. The AG also does great work in the area of consumer protection and advising consumers about fraud schemes and scams that are happening. And as a white collar crime prosecutor, I understand those areas of the law because I was in those courtrooms trying those cases. The AG also plays a huge function in enforcement when it comes to environmental protection, civil and criminal. So you need an Attorney General that can take actions to court when we have big polluters and small polluters. And I've seen those lawyers in my courtroom when I sat as a judge. So it's really imperative that you have an Attorney General that understands our court systems so that you can lead these great lawyers into the courtrooms all across the state, and also can work with the legislature, because I know what laws work and I know what laws don't. So you can have a great relationship with the General Assembly, working to promote more just laws for our citizens across the state.
Thank you. Congressman?
Sure. You know, one way to look at the Office of the Attorney General, it's like the largest law firm in the state of Maryland. It's a public interest law firm that has practice areas, as Judge O'Malley mentioned, ranging from antitrust to criminal investigation and prosecution, as well as criminal appeals. One of its perhaps most notable and forward-facing divisions is the Consumer Protection Division. I think about the wonderful work they do when it comes to enforcing our elder abuse law. It also has an environmental crimes unit that focuses mostly on intentional environmental crimes. I would advocate for a broader authority to have broader inspection and compliance responsibility to bring cases for those who are polluting our environment. The Attorney General's office has employment lawyers and labor lawyers, a very important function of the Attorney General's office. It reviews every regulation that is promulgated by a state agency. When I was in the Maryland General Assembly, I sat on the committee that did the very same thing, sitting side by side with the Attorney General reviewing those regulations. The other important role is that the Attorney General's office oversees all state procurements. That's the request for proposals at the front end, as well as when the contract is let, and also has responsibility in reviewing the MBE compliance. As Lieutenant Governor, I was intimately involved in state procurement. So the Attorney General's office is a vast, broad experience where I would submit the Attorney General, him or herself, will spend more time in Annapolis working with legislators to reform and improve the law than he or she will ever spend in a court of law. Although courts of law are important work that they do, the Attorney General is much more of an advocate in improving the law.
Thank you. Congressman, we'll start with you with this question. What are your priorities if elected Attorney General, and what makes you uniquely qualified to be Attorney General?
Sure, some of my priorities, and again, very vast responsibility, so I certainly don't want anyone to believe that these are the only priorities, but the three top priorities that I think about as I approach this job, and I think about my experience and where I can add value. One is public safety. As I travel around the state of Maryland, whether you're in Baltimore City, Montgomery County, Howard County, or where I wake up every day in Prince George's County, public safety is a huge concern because we are seeing a dramatic rise in the crime rate. So to address public safety, there are a number of things that the Attorney General needs to focus on. One is partnerships with your local state's attorneys who take the lead on investigating and prosecuting crime. The Attorney General has investigators and prosecutors focusing on things like gun trafficking, multi-jurisdictional crime, but you have to be a partner with local state's attorney. Number two is policy. Some of the most important things that Brian Frost did, for example, was working with the legislature to ban ghost guns. Keep in mind, the legislature tried to ban ghost guns for the last 3 legislative sessions, but were unsuccessful. This is difficult work. In the first 2 years, Brian Frost's office was involved, but it wasn't until Brian actually was in Annapolis. I was with him this legislative session, standing shoulder to shoulder, advocating for the need to ban ghost guns. We finally got that done. So you have partnerships, you have policy, and of course, a big piece of public safety is police accountability. We need the community working with law enforcement. When the public has confidence in law enforcement, you get more effective policing. And when you have met more effective policing, you drive down crime, you improve public safety. So public safety is certainly among the top priorities that I will have going into the office as Attorney General.
So thank you. You'll find that with some of these questions, we're going over some of the same ground that you may have already talked about, but I'll give you a chance to elaborate. So Judge O'Malley, what are your priorities as Attorney General, and what makes you uniquely qualified?
Thanks, Len. Well, I think Marylanders and people all across the nation are seeing gun violence as a huge priority for our leaders in government. And I know from being in our courts and trying those cases for years as a prosecutor and then presiding over those cases as a judge, how important it is that we do have enforcement and make our communities safe. We had a woman murdered in Baltimore City who was pregnant. We have murders almost every day here, and the rise is highest it's been since 1973. So, we've got some great laws on the books, and it's great to talk about working with people and getting laws on the books. But this job is about an attorney general who rolls up her sleeves, goes into court, and enforces the laws. That's what we need to do to keep communities safe. I'm not for defunding the police. I'm for making policing transparent and accountable. And we can do that. Listen, I've seen police officers not tell the truth. I've had them lie to me in court and nothing done about it. So I understand on a personal level how important it is to have an attorney general that is an active partner in criminal justice reform. And running the investigations unit, the independent investigations unit, is a big job for the attorney general now to investigate all of the civilian deaths that result as a result of police activity. And there's been about 16 so far this year. So having those skills as a lawyer in working in courts is really imperative. But I also want to see an increase in our environmental protection unit in the AG's office. There's only one environmental lawyer and one investigator for the entire state of Maryland. And we have so many vast natural resources that we need to protect, and we need to enforce farming regulations to protect our bay. We need to make sure that our air is clean and that our water is drinkable. And these are all things that I think are a priority as well. And also with their civil rights unit, right now, the civil rights unit, which was created by AG Frosch, doesn't have enforcement power. So I would argue I would not argue, but I would work with the legislature to get those enforcement powers so that we can start looking at pattern and practice discrimination across the state in areas of housing, education, and employment. These are all vital functions that a working AG needs to do.
So, Judge, Congressman already brought this up, but with 400 lawyers and support staff, the Office of the Attorney General is sometimes described as the largest law firm. Are there structural changes that you would like to make in the agency itself? Any kind of reorganizing?
So as far as reorganizing, not as much other than adding. So like I mentioned, the civil rights unit doesn't have enforcement powers and it has one attorney there now. So if there was enforcement powers, I'd like to see additional lawyers there, as well as in the environmental unit, the antitrust unit as well. Right now, we are seeing some real big disparities when it comes to pricing and price gouging issues. And there's not a lot of action being taken, but we need to do more enforcement in that area. So I'd like to see more attorneys as well as support staff in the antitrust and in the civil rights, as well as in the environmental unit. But I do think structurally the office is set up really well. You have, about 18 lawyers working in the criminal appeals division, and those lawyers go to court all the time because they do 40% of the work in the Court of Appeals and Court of Special Appeals. And they do a very good job. The other thing I think would be really important in the Attorney General's office is to increase the salaries of the working staff, not the AG herself, but all of these lawyers and support staff that do the good work every day to protect Marylanders in our courts. Right now, they are really underpaid and it's not as competitive as it could be. And they do such important and vital work for Marylanders all across the state in the areas that we've been discussing. So I think that asking for these attorney generals to have an increase in their salaries would help us retain the best and brightest lawyers that have to go to court day in and day out, working for Marylanders. So that's an area that I think could be changed around a little bit, just as far as salaries. But I do think that the unit, Brian Frosch added the organized crime division because he was given great authority through governor's letters to do gang activity crimes. So that was a big plus. There's 10 lawyers there now. There could probably be more because of the rise in violence that we've seen. I mean, he also created the civil rights division. So I think the office structurally is set up pretty sound.
Congressman, what do you think about?
Sure. I think the responsibility of any incoming leader is to do a complete assessment, bottom up, top down, of an organization. It's the way it's structurally organized, its policies, its procedures. In the case of the Attorney General, its authorities. What are we able to accomplish? What are we not able to accomplish? Is it consistent with the priorities of Marylanders? So I pledged to sort of do a transition between the November election and the January swearing in date, much like most executives do when they come into a new large organization. I want to see the Attorney General's office also reflect the diversity that is Maryland by race, ethnicity, gender, orientation, identification, and geography. So I'm committed to that. There are three areas where we need to have additional authorities. And some of them have already been highlighted. Civil rights. Most Marylanders believe that the Attorney General can enforce state and federal civil rights statutes on their behalf, but that's just not the case. If you're encountering discrimination in the workplace, in housing, or in accommodations, you either file your own lawsuit as a Marylander or you go to the Maryland Civil Rights Commission. I think the Attorney General needs the authority to enforce the broad range of civil rights laws, both federal and state. We talked a little about environmental enforcement. Need greater authorities to be able to enforce those who are not complying with the standards set forth in their permits. We're not talking about environmental crimes where the Attorney General already or has authority, but in the non-criminal context where we're having polluters every day impacting our clean air and our clean water. And then the last area where I think we need expanded authorities is in labor enforcement, labor trafficking, misclassification, wage theft. And the Attorney General only gets the authority when the Department of Labor invites him or her into the case. We've got to change that, and that's what I'll look to do.
Thank you. So unlike some states, the Maryland Attorney General is not tasked primarily as a prosecutor. What role should the Attorney General play in fighting and reducing crime, particularly in Baltimore? And we're starting with the Congressman.
Sure. Look, I think that's an important point. The Office of the Attorney General, 6% of the attorneys in the office are involved in the direct crime fighting effort. Criminal investigations and prosecution. It's an important 6%. Certainly let's not minimize that, but it certainly is not the sum total of what the office does. 94% of the office does things other than crime fighting. But what about that 6%? You've got to partner with local states attorneys. Now, the Attorney General should not be setting the priorities for crime fighting, whether it's in Baltimore City or whether it's in Wycomico County. You have a locally elected state's attorney. But the Attorney General should be positively influencing those priorities, committing resources to that state's attorney, and working with the U.S. attorney. Today, it's Eric Barron. He and I were neighbors. We served together in Annapolis, leveraging federal resources, the U.S. attorney, and the law enforcement capabilities there, whether it's the FBI, DEA, ATF, to make sure that we're all sort of rowing oars in the water at the same time, using the strategies, setting the priorities, combating crime locally. But let's not pretend that Baltimore City is the only place where we're seeing spikes in crime. We are seeing historic, once again, I think 7 years in a row, homicides above 300. We're on track to do that in Prince George's County. We're seeing crime at a rate we haven't seen in 15 years. So the commitment for the Attorney General certainly is with Baltimore City, but it has to be with all local states attorneys throughout the state of Maryland. And as the Attorney General, that's my commitment, to be their partner at the state level, to dedicate those resources, that mighty 6% that I always talk about, to supporting our local states attorneys.
So, Judge, you're very familiar with this area. What role should the Attorney General be playing in fighting and reducing crime?
Thanks, Len. You're right. I am very familiar with this area, sadly. I have to tell you, I've never seen Baltimore at its worst, as we are seeing now, with just the spike in violence and the inhumanity of it as well. So, the Attorney General plays a very vital role in combating crime. Since 2015, Brian Frosch, who created the Organized Crime Division, his lawyers have been so busy. And there was a bill before the legislature about 2 years ago to actually give the Attorney General's office more lawyers to help combat crime, not just in Baltimore, but in all the surrounding areas, because criminal activity doesn't stay in just, boundaries. It goes in and out. So there's been some major cases that AG Frosch has done with other jurisdictions, as well as the federal government strike force, in combating drug trafficking, human trafficking, and gun trafficking. So all three areas, guns, drugs, and and women and men who are being prostituted by drug traffickers. This is a huge area that the Attorney General works on, and you have to have the experience of being in courtrooms and understanding how to try cases in front of judges and jurors. You know, I'm the actually only candidate in this race that's tried criminal cases here in Maryland, and it's vital too in the appellate aspect of the AG's office, because the Attorney General's office, as I said earlier, tries 40% of the cases that go before the Court of Special Appeals and Court of Appeals. And I've even seen an Attorney General go to the Supreme Court twice. I actually witnessed my dad, Joe Curran, argue 2 criminal cases in the Supreme Court. So it's vital that you have that experience, and you can't learn that on day one. That's something that you get through being a trial lawyer, from, you know, cross-examination, direct examination, from arguing to juries. So it's vital in the area of protecting our communities that you have an Attorney General with that experience, as well as all the civil laws that we've been talking about as well, and knowing how to argue those cases in front of juries. But right now we're in a crisis here in our state, not just Baltimore City, but all around our state. And we need to do everything we can to curb gun violence.
Hey, Len, I think there was an opportunity for 30 seconds rebuttal.
Absolutely.
Right. Look, the experience of the attorneys in the Office of the Attorney General today far exceeds any of the candidates who are currently running for Attorney General. These are qualified, competent people with years and years of experience in the courtroom, more than any of the candidates that are running. All of this is easier said, to say that, well, we need to increase the number of prosecutors so that we can fight crime. Go to the General Assembly in Annapolis and find out how hard that is to get increased budget, to get increased authority. That's why Brian Frost is down there 90 days a year. It's not easy to get the resources you need. It may seem easy, but it really isn't. You need experience in the General Assembly so that your attorneys actually have the authorities and resources to do what you're asking them to do.
You want to take 30 seconds?
Sure. Well, 30 years is a long time to be working in courts. And I don't know how many other AGs have had 30 years on me, but I'm sure there's a few. I think it's important, though, that you have an Attorney General. It's just like a principal. Do you want a principal who's never been in a classroom? You want an Attorney General that can lead and strategize with the lawyers in the office when it comes to solving crime, when it comes to working with other jurisdictions, when it comes to resolving issues, settling cases, not settling a case. And that kind of experience you don't give to others. You have to lead with that experience. And that's why I'm the better candidate for this job.
And Len, just to clarify, if I may, maybe 15 seconds. Judge O'Malley has important experience on the district court. Attorneys generals don't show up in district court. They're in circuit court and they're in the appellate courts. Very few attorneys, the misdemeanor court is not where you have attorneys generals. They're in the felonies, the gun trafficking, the multi-jurisdictional cases.
You got to give me 15. I've actually had them appear before me. So I've never seen Congressman Brown in Baltimore City's courthouses, but I have seen assistant attorney generals who have appeared before me. And I've seen them argue cases in the district court, but I've also worked with them in the circuit court when I was a prosecutor. So they do come to the district court.
I think you'll have an opportunity to lay out some of these issues with some of the other questions, but here's one that's already come up, and we're going to start with Judge O'Malley, that the legislation passed in 2021 requires local law enforcement to refer all cases of fatal shootings and death involving police officers to the Attorney General's office. This year, the Attorney General's office testified in favor of amending the law to allow the AGs to prosecute these cases if the state's attorney declines to do so. It would be, do you favor giving the Attorney General the power to prosecute cases against police officers directly?
So as you stated, Len, correctly, the AG has the authority to investigate. And anytime you do an investigation, you also want the ability to prosecute. It's just too wobbly. And what happens, Len, if the Attorney General so far hasn't made a decision to go forward with a prosecution? But what if the Attorney General decides that there's evidence that there should be a prosecution and sends it back to a county where they say, we're not going to do it? I mean, that's a real problem. So I would suggest that we work with the state's attorneys in the prosecution or not prosecution of a police officer or officers if there's been an investigation. I think working with is the better way to do it. I know that, the state's attorneys, I've talked to many of them about this issue. They don't want, AGs coming in and taking their power away. But the real problem is transparency and accountability. And Marylanders, after witnessing George Floyd's murder on television, after seeing that travesty and all the other horrible murders that we've seen, countless murders of Black and brown people in our nation, we want transparency. And that's why that law was passed. So we need to make sure that policing is transparent and accountable. And if the Attorney General is going to have the investigative aspect of this, and I know from working with investigators on murder cases, you don't want to then hand it over to another jurisdiction and say, here's our investigation, here's the work we did, go at it. It's not the best way to handle the case. It's not the best way to handle the case for the victim, for the family of the loved ones that, lost someone to this, sadly, a horrific thing if a police officer is responsible for a murder like the ones we've seen. So it's really important that that gets cleaned up. I don't want to take the power away from from state's attorneys, but I do think for transparency and accountability, we need to have the AG working with those jurisdictions so people know that there's transparency in the investigation and that police are not policing themselves, because that certainly gives everyone pause for concern and makes communities feel unsafe.
Congressman?
Yeah, and I commend the General Assembly and Brian Frost worked closely with them in Annapolis. It's difficult work to bring greater police accountability to Maryland. And Maryland was it was the only state in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd that made some meaningful steps forward. The next logical iteration is to give to the Attorney General the authority to prosecute those cases. Again, there will be state's attorneys who may not have the resources, they may not have the will to prosecute. And I think that if the investigation warrants prosecution, the Attorney General should have that authority. But let's step back for a minute. Why are we talking about this? It's because of the lack of accountability when it comes primarily to the death of Black and brown men mostly and women in police custody. But the challenges we have in our criminal justice system aren't solely with Black and brown people in the custody of law enforcement. Maryland's criminal justice system is broken. We have the highest rate of incarceration of Black men age 18 to 24 than any other state. We have a largest percentage of inmates in Maryland that are African-American, more than even Mississippi. We're the highest in the state. The criminal justice system is broken. So yes, we've got issues with law enforcement's interaction with the Black community, but we also have problems with prosecutors and with judges. In Baltimore City, district court judges and circuit court judges over-incarcerating Black men at a higher rate. I know there have been some legislators that have called for greater accountability and transparency, looking at where that racial bias exists. Is it law enforcement? Is it prosecutor? Is it our judges or juries? I introduced a bill like that on Capitol Hill to look at the military justice system. I know it's easy to say, well, it's just a law, it's just a bill, it's easy to do. But let me tell you, our laws, our criminal justice system needs major reform if we are going to truly treat Black and brown citizens equally from police through prosecution.
Well, here's a question, Congressman, that kind of gets into this area kind of in the opposite way. Some states' attorneys have decided not to prosecute low-level crimes. What is your position on that issue?
Sure, and I sort of alluded to where I'm going, and that is states' attorneys who are elected by the people should be setting the priorities for the resources of their office. It's the people, the time, the money, the investigators. And I don't think that the Attorney General, whether it's in Baltimore City or Prince George's, Wycomico County, or anywhere else, should be setting the priorities. I do think that the Attorney General needs to be in close consultation to help shape and influence what those priorities are and to commit resources to that state's attorney when they, working with their mayors or county executives, working with their police department, whether it's their chief or their sheriff, decide what are the biggest threats to the community, where do we get the greatest value with the application of our limited resources. Now, in addition to that, I'll be in Annapolis, not just fighting for the Attorney General's budget. When I was Lieutenant Governor, I never stayed in my lane. I'm going to be in Annapolis fighting for greater budgets for states' attorneys across the state. So not just attorneys and investigators and prosecutors in the Office of the Attorney General, but for the state's attorney in Baltimore, for the state's attorney in Garrett County, to make sure that they have the resources so they can investigate and prosecute the greatest number of cases. But of course, they set the priorities on what those cases should be. Having said that, do I think a state's attorney should publicly communicate which offenses he or she will prosecute? Probably not a good approach. I think eventually people will learn what the priorities are, but I wouldn't signal that by saying, hey, we're not going to prosecute X, Y, and Z. But we all know that local state's attorneys have to set priorities with limited resources. And as the Attorney General, I'm going to be fighting so that they can have more resources to do the job that their locally elected residents have asked them to do.
Judge, I'm sure you would like more than 2 minutes to respond to this question about.
I would. Thanks, Len.
No, but I can't give you more than 2 minutes.
So, the issue is very complicated, but as Attorney General, I'm going to be working to make sure my office is doing what my office needs to do. And that is very, very much so in the organized crime division in combating crime. I don't agree with announcing publicly that you should or shouldn't be prosecuting certain cases. I just, I've seen what's happened in Baltimore City, and I've seen what's happened to the state's attorney's office. There's only 6 attorneys working in the city state's attorney's office for the entire district court, which is unbelievable because it's the busiest courthouse. There's 4 of them. So it's the busiest courthouses in the state. So I think, that not prosecuting cases, and I know from talking to people in Baltimore's community, from the church communities to to Mayor Scott, from leaders, that this is not working. It's not curbing violence, and it's not catching the people that we would catch in the criminal justice system, where I worked as a judge for many, many years, where a big part of what we were doing was getting people services that they needed. I mean, I've worked in domestic violence cases. I've worked with individuals with mental health issues, with drug addiction issues, truancy court. I've worked with real people and real problems, not just politicians, passing laws. I've actually seen the problems face on and dealt with them. And when it comes to crime, poverty drives crime. So we have to do upstream investments. But right now, we're hemorrhaging. We have got to stop the violence and find out ways to do that effectively. And the AG's office through the Organized Crime Division has such a very big role to play in this area because of the work that it does already with the strike force. I'm not going to do that. That's the role that AG Frosch has already started in 2015. And he's got 10 good lawyers in there, and they are busy, as you can imagine, going to court and trying as best as they can to keep the communities all across our state safe. So it's vital that the Attorney General works in that lane, because that's the job of the AG since 2015, fighting back with organized crime, gang activity, and keeping communities safe.
Len, if I could just piggyback, perhaps.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with Judge O'Malley. Upstream investments are important. Those upstream investments don't happen in the courtroom. Those upstream investments happen when the General Assembly, and they're looking at so much competition for limited resources, are making tough decisions on where they're going to invest the dollars. So you need an Attorney General who can make the strong case. We've got to invest and make those upstream investments. We've got to be focused on recidivism, juvenile justice reform, and resourcing all of these programs. It doesn't happen by politicians in an ivory tower. It happens by people with legislative experience to get things done in Annapolis.
Do I get to rebut?
Sure.
So again, the Attorney General needs to have, you don't put a principal in charge of a school that's never been a classroom. You need to have that ability to work with the lawyers and even to work with the legislature. It's great to say that I'm not running to be the chief lobbyist for the state of Maryland. I'm running to be the AG. So having a good relationship with the legislature is certainly very, very vital. But that's not something I'll have a problem with. But knowing exactly how to try cases, when to try cases is really vital, especially when we're talking about crime.
Really switching to a different policy area, and we'll start with Judge O'Malley. During the Hogan years, the Attorney General was given more authority to pursue lawsuits without asking the governor for permission. Are there any suits or cases that you think Attorney General should have pursued and didn't, or cases that he should not have pursued?
So what Attorney General Frost did was very smart. He went to the legislature and got the Maryland Defense Act passed so that he could engage in fighting back on some of these executive orders that Donald Trump was passing, executive orders that affected our environment here in Maryland. Liquid natural gas was getting to be, put on railways without any regulations as to speed and quantity. So he entered into these suits with other like-minded AGs to push back on those types of regulations or deregulations that were happening in the Trump administration. And I think that was a great thing. I think it's important that the Attorney General has the ability to do that without having to seek the permission of the governor, so that you can be the Attorney General for the people of Maryland, and that you don't have to ask, the executive branch for permission. So that was a great tool, and that will still be a tool that's in effect. I think another tool that would be great is getting the Attorney General the ability to sue fossil fuel companies. It's something that was a bill that was presented in the legislative session this year from Delegate Teresa and Delegate Ruth that didn't get out of committee, but it would be a tool that would allow the AG to enter into lawsuits like the one Delaware entered into against fossil fuel companies that are causing climate change and are being deceptive about their practices and that their products and how their products and practices have affected climate change. So that's something that I'd like to see and work on. I'd also like to see the Attorney General be more proactive in going after the gun lobby, which is vital right now because of what we've seen happening all across our country. But so sadly, yesterday, what happened in Texas, the federal government in 2005 passed the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. So it shields the gun manufacturers and gun sales from so much liability, where they have been found to be liable in many areas with straw purchases, with selling guns to people that are on the domestic violence registry. All of these tools, if we could repeal that act, and I know Congressman Raskin has been a real big proponent of that, and I've spoken with him about that issue. So as AG, I'd like to work really hard to get that done.
So Congressman, the question is about cases that Brian Frost pursued and those that maybe he should not have pursued.
Sure. For starters, I think it's important that people recognize that if you look at the 50 attorneys general in the country, in the 50 states, and we, of course, the District of Columbia has an attorney general. If you look at the 50 plus, the attorney general in Maryland has probably some of the most limited and restricted authorities. To do so many things, you have to go to the General Assembly to get authority. It's in the Constitution, or you have to go to the governor. And that's why I think Judge O'Malley points out correctly that, you've got to work with the General Assembly if you're going to establish manufacturers' liability to bring lawsuits against gun manufacturers, which I support. But to get there, you've got to work with the General Assembly. Those bills have been introduced and they haven't passed. But as an attorney general with experience, I'm going to work with the General Assembly to get gun manufacturer liability passed into law. Len, you were asking about the authorities that Brian Frost used, and you're really referencing the 2017 Maryland Defense Act, where Brian used it effectively to sue the federal government. As Judge O'Malley pointed out, the EPA, Department of Labor, Department of Education, that authority would not have been possible had Brian Frost not effectively gone to the legislature to get the authority, because he didn't have the authority. He was able to get that based on his years of experience in the legislature, having served as chair of judicial proceedings. I was vice chair of judiciary. I spent many years in Annapolis to understand how you can work with the General Assembly to get the authorities that you need. So I would use the Maryland Defense Act, much like Brian Frost did. I would seek gun manufacturer liability and the authority of the Attorney General to take those actions. And I would seek greater authorities, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, to take on environmental enforcement actions. That happens with good relationships and experience in the General Assembly.
So a really related question following up on this, Congressman Brown. Under what circumstances, if any, should the Attorney General's office become engaged in litigation regarding the federal government or national corporations?
Sure. And, it's interesting because the Maryland Defense Act was passed in 2017 in anticipation of adverse actions that the Trump administration would take. They, in fact, did take against Maryland. The Attorney General, Brian Frost, joined other states in fighting the travel ban on Muslims. He filed an emoluments clause case, but he also filed cases against the Environmental Protection Agency when they were rolling back clean water standards and clean air standards. He took actions against the Department of Education when Congress, and I worked with my colleagues, we worked really hard. It wasn't easy to pass the pandemic funding for our schools. The Department of Education tried to dilute that formula that would have negatively impacted Maryland. I point out all of that because it wasn't about Donald Trump, although we anticipated a lot of bad things coming from the Trump administration. But even under a Democratic administration, there may very well be agencies that are going to act in a way that threatens the interests or certainly do not promote the interests of Marylanders. So it doesn't matter who the president of the United States is, and it doesn't matter who the governor of Maryland is. I'm going to use the Maryland Defense Act to protect our environment, to protect our civil rights, to protect our access to affordable health care, to protect our financial security, to protect our retirement, to protect public safety. Because when you look at the Maryland Defense Act, those are all of the requirements that were laid out in the law, putting it to Brian Frost with the responsibility, regardless of who the president is. So look, I'd like to settle things short of litigation, but if we got to go to court, we'll have some experienced attorneys that are going to go to court to fight and protect the interests of Marylanders.
So Judge O'Malley, what areas do you think the Attorney General should be litigating against the federal government or national corporations?
Well, Len, you never know. That's the thing about being a lawyer. You never know when a COVID-19 issue is going to pop up and when you're going to have to go after a corporation that's defrauding Marylanders. You never know, when you're going to have situations happen. And that's why good lawyers need to be prepared and need to be ready. And that's what I talked about in my answer prior to this was about the Maryland Defense Act that Congressman Brown talks so much about. It's important that that's set law now so that the AG doesn't have to ask permission and can protect Marylanders when it comes to consumer protection. But when it comes to antitrust as well, I mean, look what's happening now with the baby formula shortage. You know why that's happening? There's only like 3 or 4 manufacturers for baby formula. And about 6 months ago, one of them had to shut down because sadly, their product was the cause of the death of a few infants. So they had to shut that factory down in Michigan. And now it was foreseeable, but you've only have the limited numbers of producers of baby formula. And it's the same when it comes to, so that's why it's super expensive. Any moms and dads out there will tell you it's one of the largest parts of their budget when they're going to the grocery store, super expensive. And also diapers. There's only 2 companies that sell 84% of the diapers in this country. So things like that, going after big businesses, big agriculture, big tech, are things that attorney generals can do and can work together. That's how Brian Frost was able to join in with a student loan settlement against Navient, who was, defrauding students who, as we know, are living paycheck to paycheck and working a couple of jobs to pay off their debt. So it's really important that the attorney general is constantly working to make sure that bad actors aren't there trying to take advantage of Marylanders when it comes to our antitrust laws, when it comes to consumer protection, and when it comes to the environment. Like I said before, with the liquid natural gas, being shipped through Maryland without any regulations, you have to have an AG that's a watchdog for the state, and that's how I'll be.
Thank you. Here's a kind of wonky question that wouldn't occur to a lot of people. The Office of the Attorney General now has an ombudsman to help negotiate disputes over release of documents and materials under the Maryland Public Information Act. Do you believe the state's Public Information Act is strong enough? What guidance would you give the assistant attorney generals and the agencies who are often the ones blocking access to information?
Right, Len, it's wonky just because it gets into that whole conflict and your client versus the public. So first and foremost, our clients are the people of Maryland, and that's who we're looking out for. So in advising agencies as the release of documents. And I know it's been a big issue with the Department of Environment, because I've talked to environmentalists who have told me countless times that when they want to get certain information about, levels of nitrogen in the bay, when they want to get certain information about the streams that are being checked and regulated, they get all kinds of they're being charged lawyer fees from the agency saying, well, we had to review this before we gave it to you. So now we're charging these environmentalists lawyer fees and copying fees. They said it can be thousands of dollars. So I think that's not the spirit of the law. Sunshine is the best remedy when it comes to government. You want to let the light in. And so when it comes to these areas, I want to see a much more open and transparent government when it comes to public information that can be shared, especially in the area of the environment, which is so imperative now, not just in the rural areas, but in our cities where, families of lower means are being affected disproportionately by pollution, by stormwater runoff, by old infrastructures. So we need to make sure that we're accountable to the citizens. And as Maryland's Attorney General, that would be a priority when talking about public information acts and giving access to information to Marylanders, so that in the area of the environment, but also, with Anton's law being passed, it was a huge police reform bill where they were able to get the public information about prior misconduct acts of police officers. And, some jurisdictions have been pushing back on it. Even Anne Arundel County was written up for not complying with it. Harford County didn't want to give Brian Frosch's investigators the information on the police involved shooting that happened in Harford County. He had to go to court and argue in front of a judge to get that information. So I think transparency and accountability is what Marylanders want.
Congressman, so
Sure.
the Maryland Public Information Act and the enforcement.
Sure. And a lot of what we've been talking about goes even beyond the Public Information Act, because, you're talking about Public Information Act, the Open Meetings Law, and other laws that ought to mandate disclosure to the public. So there are a few things I would do. One, remind the Assistant Attorney Generals that while we represent the state agencies, and we advise the Open Meetings Board, we work for the people. So we should be advising the agencies in the most liberal way to disclose more and not less. At the end of the day, the decisions may be made by the agency, but it certainly shouldn't be the attorneys who are being defensive or conservative in that advice. Number one. Number two is more resources. It is becoming more intensive, labor intensive, to provide the volumes and volumes of information that the public deserves. But we shouldn't let a lack of resources, and Judge O'Malley pointed out rightfully, Anton's law, access to public records involving police departments, where counties are having difficulty disclosing that information because it's such a burdensome undertaking and they lack personnel. As Attorney General, I'll fight for those resources to make sure that when the public demands information, they get it in a timely manner. And then that third piece is we've got to change the law. I think that the Public Information and Open Meetings Law should apply to places like Columbia, Maryland. It's not a municipality. It serves much like a municipality. It ought to come under the Open Meeting Law. I think also many homeowners associations. I know Governor O'Malley mentioned the runoff data from farms. That's a little bit different. There was a provision put in law that allows farmers not to disclose that. I'll go to Annapolis and change that so that that information is available to universities, research universities, and the public.
Okay. Much of the work of the Attorney General's office involves the prosecution of Medicaid fraud and consumer fraud. Are there enough resources doing that? I was at a hearing a while back where they estimated that there was twice as much fraud as they were prosecuting. How would you improve that situation, Congressman?
Sure, and there aren't enough resources. And when I was lieutenant governor, the federal government basically said to states, if you want to participate in the large national settlements around fraudulent health claims that the Department of Justice brings, you've got to amend, revise, reform Maryland's a False Claims Act. And under the first year of the O'Malley Brown administration, we didn't get that done. And I went to Governor O'Malley and I said, hey, look, second session, what do we need to do? He said, I want you to take the lead on that. We brought together all the stakeholders. Everybody has a common interest in ensuring that fraudulent claims aren't submitted, but everybody has a different perspective. And we got it done. We amended Maryland's False Health Claims Act. Today, we are covering millions and millions of dollars on behalf of Marylanders for those who would defraud Medicaid and Medicare with false claims. But because we now have a more robust law, because we are working now with the federal government and attorneys general around the country, we need more resources in Maryland to get the job done. We need investigators. We need prosecutors. We need folks on the support staff running the IT, understanding medical billing, medical coding. So I think that we've done a great job in expanding and improving the law. I think the Attorney General's office has done a great job in implementing, executing, and carrying that out and saving dollars, returning dollars to Marylanders. But I can tell you, there's more fraud out there that needs to be dealt with. So I definitely support, and I would include in a budget request in 2023 more resources to take on false health claims.
Thank you. Judge, your view on the prosecution of Medicaid fraud, consumer fraud?
So,
Resources.
the Consumer Protection Act granted the Attorney General the authority to go after these types of cases with any type of consumer fraud, whether it's in the automobile industry, whether it's in the housing market, whether it's a securities fraud situation. It kind of encompasses all of that, even though there's a separate unit for securities fraud. So it's an important area of the office where there is a lot of work done in the office. I've seen attorney generals go to court and in these issues. I saw as a prosecutor, a doctor that was touting a medical product that was going to cure cancer. And it was basically just him repackaging vitamins. So there's all kinds of bad actors out there taking advantage of Marylanders. And whether it's through a robocall scam or whether it's through, a friend who's scamming them in some sort of a financial scheme. These are things that the Attorney General can proactively go after, and especially in Medicaid fraud. It's important. I was just actually speaking with a Medicaid fraud lawyer from the office tonight. They do need more lawyers because there is more and more and more of this happening. There's just so many people out there defrauding our system, and making sure that we have an Attorney General that knows how to lead those lawyers, because many of those lawyers are going into court every day fighting for consumers to get their restitution back, whether it's in our local courts or even in our federal courts. When it comes to class actions, AG Frost just did a big settlement against TurboTax, who TurboTax was ripping off Marylanders by saying you get free tax advice and free this and free that, luring them in and then making them pay for services that the federal government could actually give them for free. So you need to have, a really proactive AG's Consumer Protection Unit protecting Marylanders and all the different ways that these bad actors are scamming us.
This actually wasn't one of the prepared questions, but it's come up in several responses, and that has to do with budget authority. You want more resources for, this starts with Judge O'Malley, the question does, but you want more resources to do a lot of different things. Is that really possible to do in Annapolis?
Len, the AG's office, again, is protecting Maryland's agencies, Maryland's peoples, Maryland's natural resources, our consumers, public safety. It's the most complex, largest law firm in the state of Maryland. So I think it's imperative that we get more resources. I say we need to pay the attorney generals a higher salary and maybe add a couple of lawyers in certain areas, because only having one lawyer in the environmental crimes unit is just not enough for an entire state. So I do think it's important, and going to the legislature and asking the governor, to give more money and more resources for the office is fair. And I think there's a willingness. People understand the important nature of the attorney general's office when it comes to paying people competitive salaries so that they can protect Marylanders in all the great ways that the Attorney General's office does. So it is important that the Attorney General work with the legislature. I've worked with people every day for 30 years, so I'm not sure, when it comes to legislators, gosh, I've been around politicians all my life. I certainly know how to handle myself in a group of political people because I grew up in that arena, and then was married to a governor. So, working with the legislature is something I actually did when I was first lady. I handled a few issues there that were really important and near and dear to me, such as marriage equality and anti-bullying laws, because we saw too many teenagers being affected by online bullying. And so many of them, ended up with some sad stories, kids taking their own lives. So working with the legislature is something I'm really excited about doing as the first woman attorney general, and making great relationships with legislators and working with them when it comes to reviewing bills for constitutionality issues, all of those types of great work that the attorney general does with the legislature, and arguing and urging them to support the office of the attorney general so that we can have the best and brightest lawyers defend our state.
And Congressman, you're also very aware of the atmosphere in Annapolis,
Right. And look,
trying to get resources.
Len, I'm the only one running either Democrat or Republican that has, extensive experience working with legislative bodies, because I've been a member of the legislative body. And while I would tell you that the legislature has a good relationship with the Attorney General's office, I wouldn't say that there's a willingness necessarily to increase the budget of the Attorney General's office. You've got to make a strong case, because everybody's making a strong case. The Department of Natural Resources is making a strong case. The Department of Transportation is making a strong case. The Office of the Public Defender is making a strong case. County governments are making a strong case. There is competition for a finite set of resources in Annapolis. And we can all recognize the great job that is happening in the Office of the Attorney General. But if you think you can go down to Annapolis and simply say, hey, we're doing great work and these are priorities, give us a bigger budget, it's not the way it works. That's why in one of the earlier questions, I said the responsible thing to do as a new Attorney General is to do a bottom-up, top-down review of the office, take 2 months to do a comprehensive transition that involves outside stakeholders. So when you go to Annapolis in January, you can make a persuasive case for the authorities that you need and for the budget you need. Because anytime you talk about additional authorities in Annapolis, and both Judge O'Malley and I have talked about that during this forum, the legislature sees dollar signs. You're asking for more authorities this year. Next year, you're going to want more dollars. Sure, it's important, but we got a lot of things that are important to Marylanders. You got to compete. You got to compete in Annapolis. A lot of important things are being done in Annapolis, a lot of difficult decisions. I've got the experience. I know how to make the strong, persuasive case for an appropriation and an authorization for the Office of the Attorney General.
Rebuttal?
Sure.
Thank you. So I do know how to make a strong case because I'm the only one running that has done that. And I've made strong cases for 10 years as a prosecutor, and also, as, just working in courtrooms. So I understand that, and I know how to compete as well. I think it's really, really imperative, though, that you have an attorney general like the last 4 attorney generals. All 4 of the last attorney generals have had trial experience and knowing how to advocate for your position. That's what lawyers do, and that's what you do in court, and that's what attorney generals do, and that's what you'll do in Annapolis. I mean, politicians are people. It's not, there's no sort of science to this, like, oh, I was a member of the legislature, so therefore I'm going to be more persuasive.
Thank
Len,
you.
if I can.
Yeah.
It's not as if like, oh, you had to spend 30 years in a courtroom to understand the importance of courtroom work. Judges and prosecutors, typically judges, not prosecutors, are making an argument to a jury of 6 to 12 people. You go to Annapolis, you're making your case to 188 people. They represent all 4 corners of this state. They bring their own interests and priorities, and you're competing with that. So you've got to have experience in Annapolis to be able to successfully compete in that forum.
So I'm going to combine a couple of questions. The environment has come up a number of times. What areas would you like the Attorney General to pursue? For instance, proposals to sue fossil fuel companies, the whole area of climate change. What should be the role of Attorney General? And I'm actually, because I switched up, I forgot where we.
I think I'm next.
Yeah, I think you are.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the rebuttal kind of got me confused.
So a few areas, and I did mention this earlier. I mean, the Attorney General has limited authority when it comes to enforcing federal and state environmental laws. When those violations of environmental laws rise to a criminal level, which are really 4 categories, intentional discharge, or also intentional storage of hazardous materials, usually intentional conduct to circumvent the environmental laws. The Attorney General has a robust environmental crimes unit, and they're doing a great job. They need more resources. What I'm talking about is the non-criminal enforcement side of the environmental law. I'm talking about a energy company that is not meeting the standards for its gas leaks along its gas pipeline. If today, the only way that the Attorney General gets involved in that case is if the Maryland Department of the Environment invites the Attorney General in. And what we've seen often under governors like Governor Hogan and Governor Ehrlich, there's less of a willingness to enforce those standards. That's why Brian Frosch went down to the legislature and advocated for the Maryland Department of the Environment this year to get more budget, more money to conduct inspections and to take enforcement actions. And I think that's good that Brian did that. I'd take it one step further. I would go to the legislature and make the persuasive case. The Attorney General needs independent enforcement authority. So regardless of who the governor is, we can enforce clean air, clean water standards, federal and state. And I think that's a big priority that the Attorney General should focus on. And as the Attorney General, I most certainly will.
Thank you, Judge.
Thanks, Len. So, when you're talking about the environment, we're really talking about 3 things: environmental justice, environmental protection, and environmental reforms. And the legislature just passed some sweeping legislation with the Climate Solutions Act now, which is a great law and in so many ways is going to help us curb greenhouse gas emissions. So as Attorney General, making sure that those laws are implemented would be a priority. Also, when it comes to environmental justice, working with local municipalities when they're talking about zoning permits and where they're going to put wastewater treatment plants, and what's happening right now in Maryland with the wastewater treatment plants, is abominable. MES has taken over Back River wastewater treatment, and I believe is going to be taking over Patapsco, or is looking into that, because it's just aged, and the potential for pollution, it is polluting all the time. So it has to be stopped. And the Attorney General's office has been working in that area as well. But Congressman Brown's wrong. It's not just the Department of Environment that gives referrals to the AG's office. It's also the Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Planning, as well as citizens call in complaints, whether they're civil or criminal. So the AG's office, again, has 1 lawyer and 1 investigator working in that unit, which is not robust at all. So it would be a real priority of mine to make sure that we get more help in that area, because there will be hopefully a Democratic governor that will be more responsive when it comes to the Department of Environment as far as staffing, because right now the agency is so understaffed that they don't have the inspectors and the regulators doing the work they're supposed to do. That's why the legislature had to pass a law. Senator Pinsky got a law passed to make sure that these zombie permits were not continually being allowed administratively without the required testing at these different farm agencies where they were polluting the water and the chicken farms. So it's really, really imperative, that we work with the Department of Environment as our client, but also making sure that they're doing everything that they can to staff the agency as well as the Department of Natural Resources, so that we can keep our precious natural resources forever.
Len, just an addendum, perhaps?
Yeah, but
Yeah, I agree with
you were
Judge
mentioned
O'Malley.
specifically, so.
Yeah, I agree with the Judge O'Malley. The Climate Solutions Now Act is an important step in the right direction of addressing climate change. However, I would just point out, Judge O'Malley mentioned that as Attorney General, she would enforce the provisions of that law. There's not a single provision in the Climate Solutions Now Act that gives the Attorney General the authority to enforce that law. So as Attorney General, I would go to Annapolis and make the case that you need the Attorney General broader authority to enforce climate and environmental protections.
We're going to really switch some topics here to things that haven't come up. And so I believe we're starting with Judge O'Malley, correct? Now I've got the rebuttals have really gotten me.
I think Judge O'Malley's goes first.
Right. What role does the Attorney General?
I'm sorry for doing your job, Len.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I always need help. What's the role of the Attorney General on human trafficking?
Well, actually, it's a very important role, and that comes out of the organized crime division, because oftentimes with trafficking, you're talking about one or more persons engaging in that. And actually, I've been through training with the Maryland State Police as a judge in the area of human trafficking and how to identify victims of human trafficking, because, you know, oftentimes the victims are either runaways, sometimes victims are family members. It's a very complicated issue, and there are many overlaps of human trafficking with domestic violence that happens. They've seen a lot of that. So working with these victims to get them away from the trafficker is really a huge challenge. And when I was a district court judge for many years, we had a court where we actually diverted any women or men who were charged with prostitution to get services to find out what was, because nobody wanted to be in that business, to find out what they needed. It was either drug issues, mental health issues. Oftentimes, many of those men and women were being trafficked. And it's an area that I've gone through extensive training as well with the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges on how to address those cases and how to help victims of human trafficking break from the chain of, you know, dominance that they've been taken over. And it is a lot of repetition to domestic violence and a lot of similarities to domestic violence victims. So the AG, through the Organized Crime Division, does multi-jurisdictional human trafficking cases, because like I say, you know, they had a situation that was coming from Baltimore City and Anne Arundel County, which was not just human trafficking, it was also drug trafficking. And the Attorney General, with working with the federal government and local law enforcement, was able to crack down on a big human trafficking ring that was going on. So that is a big role that the AG's office plays. And I know from trying those cases and dealing with them as a judge, the sadness, you know, that is involved with these young men and women. So it's important. It's an important role.
Congressman?
Sure. Certainly ensuring that the organized crime unit is fully staffed, resources, and trained on human trafficking cases, how to investigate them, how to develop the case, how to prosecute those are important. I've said before, and I believe firmly, that education and awareness is critical. I've worked with the Center for Human Trafficking at the University of Maryland College Park, stood up, I think, about 4 or 5 years ago. In fact, I got some federal dollars to help stand that up and to sustain it. They do a wonderful job in educating local law enforcement and prosecutors, working with nonprofit organizations and our schools to help those, certainly those who have the care and the custody of children, but also, because we are talking often younger girls, but also to raise awareness, education to the victims of human trafficking, the signs, reporting, resources, and et cetera. So I think you can't underestimate the need to do that education and outreach. The third piece I would mention is that when we think about human trafficking, and we often focus on sex trafficking, and that's important. We also have to look at the non-sex labor trafficking that is on the rise in Maryland as well. We see that in large scale, in abundance, particularly in construction, on construction sites. You see it in a lot of outdoor manual labor. And that does harm to so many. And often they're undocumented immigrants who aren't getting paid a fair wage. And that person who's not paying that undocumented immigrant, you can rest assured they're probably also not paying taxes to state and local government. So we also have to look at labor trafficking, and that's why in the workplace, and that's why as Attorney General, one of the things I'm going to do is stand up a workers' protection unit looking at labor trafficking, wage theft, and things like misclassification. I think it's all related.
We're getting near the end, folks, because it's almost 10 of 9. At least one more question, which will start with Congressman Brown. Maryland has large communities of immigrants. Do you see any role for the Attorney General in helping immigrants or helping them navigate the immigration process?
Absolutely. And let me just start by saying, look, I'm a first generation American. My father came to this country out of poverty from Jamaica, first in our family to get a college degree. Couldn't get into medical school primarily because of race and his immigration status. Went to Europe, Switzerland, met my mother. They came back to this country so they could not only have a better way of life in raising their family, but to make a contribution to the greatness that is America. America is a great nation because of who we are and where we've come from. Some of our families have come involuntarily, some are under duress and persecution, others perhaps more voluntary. But my family's journey here is no different than so many others. We're making a contribution to the greatness that is our country. So as Attorney General, based on my lived experience, I'm going to do everything I can to support new Americans, regardless of your status. And I will do what past Attorney Generals have done, and to issue an advisory opinion to local government that says, listen, you don't have to be deputized as an agent of the federal Homeland Security. You focus on local law enforcement and let them do their jobs. If a city, a municipality in this state wants to set up a sanctuary, a city or community, as Attorney General, I'm going to support that because I know the value that immigrants bring to this country. I fought hard on Capitol Hill for pathways to citizenship, for the Dreamers. When I was in Annapolis, it took 10 years. We finally got the DREAM Act passed into law where undocumented immigrants can pay in-state tuition in Maryland. This is my family's story. These are my values, and that will be my commitment as Attorney General.
Judge?
Thanks, Len.
Immigrants. Yeah.
So nothing makes me more angry than to hear the rhetoric that we're hearing nationally about immigrants and what immigrants are doing. And it really, really was during the Trump administration where there was such a huge amount of this happening, and he gave license to that. And I saw the effects of violence on immigrant communities in the courts because those cases would come before me as hate crimes. So, I understand the real effects of discrimination in that area. That's why I supported the Dignity Not Detention bill that Delegate Vaughn Stewart had to have the legislature overturn Governor Hogan's veto. It says that the state is not going to participate in Homeland Security's detention with any of our state detention facilities and won't be able to use the Motor Vehicle Administration to track down individuals here in Maryland for immigration and deportation. So I stand by that law. And I also think it's important at these detention hearings that people have counsel. Legal aid does a really good job with that, and public justice lawyers do a good job with representing, but I think it should be mandatory that lawyers are there at these deportation hearings for people because it's such a huge, vital decision that's going to be made. So it's, again, it's an area that I'm passionate about because of all the things that I've seen over the past 30 years working in courtrooms. And when I've seen people come in from the immigrant community, I've also seen how that rhetoric under the Trump administration caused more victims of domestic violence not to come to court to get services because they were afraid of coming to court, calling law enforcement. They were afraid to get just, vital services for community safety because they were so fearful that they would be turned in. So, it's an area that I feel very deeply about. I mean, again, all of us here in America, unless we're Native Americans, are from another country. And we all have a story to tell. And that story is very poignant for everyone's family. So we have to understand that when new Americans come here, that they're welcomed and supported.
Thank you. There's a topic that wasn't on our agenda, we never discussed, and I just feel the need to bring it up. Judge O'Malley, you mentioned it briefly, but the massacre in Texas, and does Maryland has some very strict gun laws. Does Maryland need to do any more than it's already doing about gun violence?
So you're 100% correct, Len. We have some very good laws on the books. When my husband was governor, after Sandy Hook, he had some great laws passed dealing with firearms and regulated firearms, and they're very good laws. And then the ghost gun bill that passed banning ghost guns was very important. But the problem isn't that the guns, where are they coming from? When all these guns during these investigations, when they track them and trace them with the ones that they can, they're not coming from Maryland. They're coming from Pennsylvania. They're coming from Virginia. And, with the federal government granting this immunity to manufacturers and gun dealers, there's so many rogue, gun purchasers that are getting hundreds and hundreds of guns and selling them on the black market. And there's no regulation of it. There's no other industry in our country that has this protection. So I don't know what's wrong with Congress. I don't know why. I know, that Congressman Raskin, I've talked to him about this issue. He said he's worked on it. He co-sponsored a bill to get the repeal of that done. It's going to take hard work to get it done federally because nothing happens there. But in the states, we can really do more for enforcement. And that's what we need to do. We have, like you said, really good laws. They were passed about a decade ago. But let's talk about what we're doing now and how we can enforce those laws so we can keep communities safe. I mean, every single day, there's another sad story and people are being desensitized to it. What happened in Texas? I mean, how many mass shootings have we already had this year? No one can keep count of it. And I was talking to a reporter today who told me that his station doesn't even want to report on shootings that happen in his community because they say, well, people don't want to hear about this anymore. It's become a national health crisis. And what we're doing right now by not enforcing is one area, but going after where these guns are coming from, I think is something that I will actively pursue as your next attorney general, because the gun manufacturers and the gun salespeople have to be made liable for the mass shootings that are happening almost on a monthly basis.
Congressman, I'm sure you have some ideas about what's wrong with Congress on gun.
Yeah, well, not just ideas. I experience it every day. In fact, I supported universal background checks on Capitol Hill. We got it out of the House. It's something that's supported by 86% of Marylanders, which means by definition, it's Democrats, Republicans, and independents. The NRA, the gun manufacturers, they have a chokehold on a small group of Republicans in the Senate that are unwilling to act. But Maryland has done some good things. And going back to your question about, the state of our laws, they're good, but they have to be improved. When we passed the ban on assault weapons, I led the town halls across this state. I was in communities in rural Maryland, in Baltimore City and Prince George's County. It wasn't easy to get done. We're the only state that got it done. As I mentioned earlier, we banned ghost guns. It wasn't easy. It didn't happen in one session. It took 3 sessions. When I was lieutenant governor, my cousin Kathy was shot and killed by her estranged boyfriend. I went to the domestic violence advocates and I said, hey, we got to do something. We got to change the law. What's your top priority? They said, we need judges to have the authority to order abusers to surrender their firearms. I learned that they've been trying to do it for 10 years unsuccessfully. I don't take credit for having gotten it done, but I worked with the advocates. We looked at the strategy. We had to revamp the strategy. And in the next legislative session, we got it done. We've got strong laws in Maryland, but we've got to do better. Our red flag law, I'm glad we have one. We've got to expand the category of people that can file the petitions, okay, including educators and including neighbors, not just police and family members. We've got to invest more in mental health in our schools and in our juvenile justice system. We talked earlier about gun manufacturing liability. We've got to improve the laws in Maryland in order to make Marylanders safe. Changing the laws is not necessarily going to completely eliminate gun violence, but if we don't, we're not going to reduce it. We won't have an opportunity to reduce it.
So we are at the end of our question period. We've gone slightly longer than we planned. Judge O'Malley, we're going to start out with you with a 3-minute closing statement. Feel free not to use all the 3 minutes.
Thanks. Well, listen, this has been really wonderful, and I know it's a lot of hard work in getting all the organizations together and the sponsors together. So I appreciate, doing this and letting us come talk tonight about our experiences and why we want to lead the Attorney General's office. I think in the beginning I said it's because of all the things that I've learned over the past 30 years of working with real people who've had real problems day in and day out in our courtrooms. And, a lot of what the Attorney General does is in Maryland's courts. Like I said, the district court, the circuit court, I've seen them. I've seen them in the courts of appeals and courts of special appeals, and even up to the Supreme Court. It's imperative that you have a leader that has that trial room experience, because what you're talking about in the Attorney General's office is the rule of law. It's not politics. It's not like a pay to play thing. It's rule of law. That's the answer. Advising your clients as best as you can, proactively fighting against rising violent crime that's, in our communities all across the state, especially in Baltimore. It's about making sure that we are protecting our vital resources, natural resources, doing everything we can to work with the governor and the Department of the Environment to make sure that the laws that are on the books are being enforced. You're not, like I said, the chief lobbyist for the state and talking about passing laws and making laws. It's about using the laws, strategizing with the lawyers in the office on how to use the laws, how to interpret the laws. I've presided over thousands of cases, and I've tried hundreds of cases in front of judges and juries, all types of cases, criminal and civil. So it's really important that you have that experience so that you can work with the lawyers in the office in so many ways. And also that experience when you're talking to the legislature about the need for changes in law. That's what happened when the tobacco industry was being sued. The AG had to go to the legislature and get them to change the law so the suit could go forward. So having that knowledge, that intimate knowledge of the law and how it works in courtrooms is really vital to the role of an attorney general. I think I said earlier, the past 4 attorney generals in modern history, starting with Stephen Sachs up to Brian Frosch, have all had extensive trial experience. Only 2 of them had legislative experience. So it's really important in this role, again, that you have a leader that has the skill, the experience, and the judgment when it comes to advocating and arguing for Marylanders, so that the good work of protecting our natural resources, our consumers, our senior citizens, as well as just all people in our communities, because everybody wants the same thing. We all want to be able to walk out and go to work in a safe environment. We all want to be able to enjoy our communities without the fear of violence. And the Attorney General plays such a vital role in that area, as well as the others that we've discussed this evening. So again, I thank you all for your time and your dedication to the forum. Really appreciated talking with everyone here this evening. Get out there and vote on July 19th, and I hope I get your support.
Thank you, Judge. Congressman.
Thanks, Len. And once again, thanks to the sponsors for this evening's forum. I want to thank those in the audience who took the time to hear from both candidates. I want to thank Judge O'Malley for her certainly 30 years of service and her willingness to continue to serve the people of Maryland. In my opening, I mentioned, and I think it's pretty obvious to most people, that the Attorney General, who presides over the largest law firm in the state of Maryland and represents the state in court and administrative proceedings and in so many ways, but works for the people. So whether you're, tackling the rise in crime or improving public safety, whether you're addressing climate change, that issue came up tonight, or environmental justice, whether you're dealing with, affordable housing issues or quality healthcare, or yes, defending against attacks on women's reproductive freedoms. I only wish that we would have had more time to talk about that this evening, because those attacks are coming to Maryland. And I was proud to go to Annapolis this year and to testify in support of a very important bill that put more resources, expanded access for women in Maryland who need reproductive health services, including abortion services. To take into account the thousands of women who are likely to come to Maryland because of the draconian and cruel laws that are being passed in places like Texas and Mississippi and Oklahoma. And we also expanded the criteria, the eligibility of those providers that can perform abortions to include midwives. I wish he had more time to talk about that.
But as the Attorney General, whether I'm focused on that or protecting consumers or seniors or veterans, voting rights, workers' rights, or the rights of the LGBTQIA plus community. And I wish we had more time to talk about that and the work that I've done in that area, both on Capitol Hill and in Annapolis. I'm going to fight for justice. I'm going to fight for equity, and I'm going to fight for every Marylander. I just ask you, as you sort of leave this forum and you think about the questions that were raised, the issues that were raised, the questions that were asked, and think about the answers that both candidates gave. You're looking for an attorney general who's not going to just accept the law. Yeah, the law is what the law is today, and we've got to enforce it, investigate it, prosecute it, et cetera. But Marylanders looking for an attorney general with the experience to change the law, to improve the law, to address the ever-changing conditions in our economy, in our society, in our culture, in our classrooms. That's my experience. That's why I'm running for attorney general. I ask for your vote on July 19th.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Thanks to you both. Thanks to you both for answering the question substantively. I probably should have asked a question about, is there anything we didn't ask about that you would like to talk about? Thanks to the audience for joining us tonight. At the moment, we have 131 participants. We were almost up to 200 at some point. A YouTube video of this forum will be available in a few days, so a lot more than the people who are here tonight will be able to see it on the University of Baltimore website. It takes a few days because they got to put in closed captioning. Those who registered will receive an email with the link. Please share it with your friends and family. There'll be a virtual forum for the two candidates for state controller next Tuesday evening, May 31st at 7 p.m. As mentioned at the beginning, early voting begins Thursday, July 7th and runs for a week. The primary is on Tuesday, July 19th. You have until June 28th to register to vote. Or you can register to vote at the polling place, but you will be given a provisional ballot. So thanks to everybody for participating and all the sponsors. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks.